All right, I think we've still probably got a few people joining us, but we might make a start. So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is David Spriggs. I'm the CEO of Infoxchange and the chair of the Australian Digital Inclusion Alliance. And I'd like to begin today's meetup by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're all meeting from today. For me, that's the beautiful and unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I pay my respects to elders past, present, and any that may be joining us today. And encourage you to please use the chat if you like to just acknowledge where you're joining us from today. And particularly at this time, acknowledge the significant challenges that a number of First Nations community members are facing as a result of the debate that we've got going on with the voice to Parliament, and just how difficult that is in community at the moment. I'm proud to be leading an organisation in Infoxchange where our board has formally endorsed the yes vote to the Indigenous voice to Parliament, and just how incredibly important it is that we come together as a broader community at this time. And in the context of digital inclusion in today's discussion, really acknowledging still the considerable gap that we have between First Nations and non-First Nations people in Australia. That came out again in the most recent Australian Digital Inclusion Index, where we've got a gap of 7.5 points between First Nations and non-First Nations people, and particularly pronounced in regional and remote areas. So we've got a lot of work to do in that area. We welcome the federal government's First Nations Digital Inclusion Plan, but recognise that it's very much a whole of community effort that we need to help close that gap. So welcome anyway, everyone, to today's meetup. The subject for today's meetup is digital capability in Australia, unpacking digital preparedness for access to work, learning and life. And this is a really exciting moment for us at the Australian Digital Inclusion Alliance. So it really represents kind of one of the first pieces of broader public engagement on a project that we've been focused on for the last year or so, on the Australian Digital Capability Framework and how that might be used more broadly to bring together community in digital skills. We've got a great lineup of speakers today. Unfortunately, Patrick Kidd from the Future Skills organisation can't be with us at the last minute, but delighted that Ross Rayburn has been able to join us. Ross is the Director of Engagement and Growth at the FSO, and has been with us on this journey from the very beginning. And Ross clearly was part of the Digital Skills organisation before it recently became the Future Skills organisation. We've also got with us Ishtar, who is our well known to most of you, who is our convener of the Australian Digital Inclusion Alliance, and again has kind of been leading on this work from the very beginning. And delighted that Emma Rice has been able to join us. Emma is the Senior Advisor Learning and Teaching at TAFE Queensland, and has been really deeply engaged in a lot of the working groups around this project. So we'll hear from each of our speakers soon, but just to start with some housekeeping, we are recording this session, and we'll make sure that the recording is available after the event in the next edition of the ADIA newsletter. If you're not already a subscriber to the newsletter, please go ahead and subscribe. Caitlin will put the link to that in the chat. So we'll start today from hearing from each of our panelists, and then we'll move into a Q&A session. But we very much encourage you to please put your questions in as each of the speakers is speaking today. So either into the Q&A box or into the chat panel. And as we often find on these meetups, that chat can become quite lively, and it's fantastic when everybody is discussing the content as our speakers are moving through and as we get into the Q&A. So please use the Q&A and the chat as we go through. Just before we get started, a little bit about the Australian Digital Inclusion Alliance. For those of you who might not know us, the ADIA was established back in 2017 now, following the National Year of Digital Inclusion, which was in 2016. It's a shared initiative, over 500 organisations from across business, government, academic and the community sector, all with a common goal as to how can we accelerate progress on digital inclusion. The ADIA is supported by Infoxchange, and it's backed by Google, Telstra and Tas Networks. And really we see the strength is that it's supported right across all sectors, which is really what we think is so important if we're going to solve the issue of digital inclusion. This isn't just a problem for government or just a problem for industry, just a problem for education or just a problem for the community sector. It needs all of these organisations to be working together. So our vision is to build a more digitally inclusive Australia, and really for us that is all about economic and social participation. We're guided very much by the Australian Digital Inclusion Index, and the latest version of that was released in July this year, and still shows that we have a really significant gap in Australia, close to 10% of the population remaining highly excluded, and together with those that are digitally excluded, close to a quarter of our population. And we follow this work through the 3 A's of access, affordability, and ability. Which is really a good segue into today's discussion, which is all about digital ability and digital skills. We know how important digital skills and capability is for all aspects of work and life. And there's been so much work going on in this space in the last 12 months, particularly, as I said, around the digital capability framework. So we'll move on and hear from each of our panelists. So we're going to start with Ishtar, and as I said before, Ishtar is probably known to most of you as the convener of the Australian Digital Inclusion Alliance. Alongside ADIA, Ishtar is also a director of Eloquium, which is a public affairs firm focused on digital technology. And Ishtar previously has held a number of senior roles across the technology sector, government affairs, and in law in private practice and global tech players. So welcome Ishtar, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, David. It's great to be here with my other panelists. I don't know if you saw me signing to the other side. It's like I've got a group of 5 kids playing handball next door to me. So cheers to everybody who's managing school holidays and everything that goes with it. So as David said, the ADIA has been focused on work across access, affordability, and digital ability for quite some time. And the project that we're excited to talk to you about today relates to digital ability. Where it really comes from is work that we did a few years ago on a national digital inclusion roadmap, which the ADIA published, I think, in 2019. And in that roadmap, we identified a huge amount of fragmentation in efforts to close the digital divide. There's a huge amount of excellent work going on, but it lacks a cohesive whole of economy, whole of a society strategy to pull it all together and to make sure that everybody's pushing in the same direction. And that's also true around digital ability. You'll hear conversations where people talk about digital skills, digital ability, digital literacy, digital capability. They're talking about slightly different things in each instance, perhaps at the top end of digital skills, tech skills, all the way down to people picking up a device for the first time. And so that is really what has motivated us to come together with the FSO, with a number of organisations, some of whom are on the call today, to really work through how we can drive forward a common language around digital ability. So together with the FSO, we are at the beginning of a journey of talking to people about 3 things that we think would really help. The first is a clear shared commitment to every person being able to access training that enables them to lift their digital capability to at least the level where they can meaningfully access work, learning, and life. And that's a really deliberate decision to talk about access to work, learning, and life. We recognise that people are increasingly on digital citizens, that government services, online banking, a whole range of things are offered online. So we need to make sure that we're encompassing that sense of citizenship in what we're doing, including social connection online. And the second thing that we believe we can do is to create that common language to describe digital capability, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. And the third is the adoption of an agreed national benchmark for digital capability, so that we have a common goal and something that we can measure progress against. So this conversation today is part of a wider set of work we're doing to socialise this proposal, seek feedback, adjust, iterate, and work in partnership with a wide range of organisations is the goal. So coming first to the need for a digital capability uplift across the economy and society, it's pretty clear at the moment that there's a very vibrant discussion going on around Australia's productivity, its ability to lift our prosperity as a nation and make sure that we can navigate the increasing digitalisation of society. And in corollary to that, it's really important that all Australians are able to navigate that world successfully. Jobs are increasingly requiring digital skills, and access to learning opportunities are increasingly happening online. We were really pleased to see that the federal government included digital preparedness as a key indicator of a prosperous Australia in their Measuring What Matters framework. And that indicator is going to draw on the Australian Digital Inclusion Index to track progress on all Australians' digital preparedness, including their digital ability. And as David mentioned, the index shows us that there is still a really significant gap to be addressed. And on digital ability in particular, for the last few years, the index has found that that sits at around 64%. It's moved less than 1% over quite a few years. It's some might say it's flatlining. And that's not because there's a lack of work going on. There is a huge amount of great work going on, including by organisations on this discussion today. What we want to try and help achieve is to make sure that we've got the highest impact we can from that work by making sure that everyone's pushing in the same direction. And we'll get into that in a minute. The ADIA also shows, perhaps unsurprisingly, that the most digitally excluded cohorts are most likely to be First Nations Australians, those with a disability, those living in public housing, those who haven't completed secondary school, and also older Australians. But it's not just these cohorts where we're seeing challenges around digital ability. And we're also seeing, as I flagged earlier, that this challenge exists right across the continuum. It's also the vast majority of businesses who are operating in an increasingly digitalised environment. Some of the research has shown that around a quarter of those businesses can't find the workers that they need to help them operate in that digitally enabled way. And then high-tech businesses are also struggling to find appropriately skilled workers. In fact, the FSO found that there'll be a shortage of 370,000 digital expert and digitally enabled workers by 2026. So the problem exists right across a broad continuum of skill levels. And it also exists with a diverse range of cohorts. And that diversity of cohorts behooves us to embrace the diverse range of organisations who are working in this space. Each of those organisations has expertise working with different groups, and we need to empower them all, to listen to them, to learn from the organisations working with different parts of the population, whether that's in Digimob, who are doing excellent work with First Nations Australians, Alana Madeline Foundation working with younger Australians, Be Connected with older Australians, and of course the VET system and TAFE's offering training into all parts of Australia, including regional Australia. So it's that idea of empowerment that brings us to this need to, how do we facilitate excellent communication and collaboration across all the organisations working in this space. And that's where we think an agreed common language, a shared common language, can have a really big impact, that we can create an environment where an individual can say, hey, my digital capability is currently at a level 3. I really want to go for this job that's advertised as a level 4. And now I need to find some program that's going to help take me from a 3 to a 4. And the organisations providing training can articulate what they offer in a similar way. In that, and with that, we create an environment where individuals, employers, training providers, and community organisations are all talking the same language, so that we can focus on the digital capability uplift rather than navigating what it is we need or how to articulate what we're offering. It's there are lots of different frameworks at the moment in Australia for digital capability, lots of different ways of talking about these things, and they all say slightly different things. And that's something that we're responding to. We want employers to be able to easily describe the digital capability required for an open position. We want job seekers to be able to accurately describe their skill set, training providers and organisations offering upskilling to be able to articulate what it is that they offer, and all at the end of the day, bringing it back to making that easier to navigate and easier to uplift for individuals. So I might pause there. Ross is going to take you through that three-pronged approach that I mentioned earlier. And as I mentioned at the outset, this is really the beginning of a process to ask for feedback, to test the approach, and to hopefully start creating momentum towards having that shared language. The intergenerational report was released by Treasury a couple of weeks ago, and it stated that the expanded use of digital and data is one of the 5 biggest forces that will shape our economy over the coming decade. And our hope is that as that happens, we can create the settings that will support a truly digitally inclusive Australia, and that we can turbocharge digital capability for all Australians.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ishtar, and for your leadership in this work. And it's just so critically important, as you said, this sort of common language and all of us pulling in the same direction, given the significant challenges we're facing around digital skills. Just a reminder to everybody, please put your comments or questions into the chat and the Q&A as we're going. I think as we started, unfortunately, the chat function wasn't turned on for everybody. We weren't being particularly inclusive there. Our apologies, but Caitlin's assured us that is up and running now. So please use the chat function and Q&A as we go through. But next we're going to hear from Ross Rayburn. As I said before, Ross is currently the Director of Engagement and Growth at the Future Skills Organisation, and previous to that was at the Digital Skills Organisation, the DSO, leading a lot of this work. So looking forward to hearing from Ross and how we get to that challenge, that statistic Ishtar just mentioned, Ross, of 370,000 job shortage that we might have by 2026. No small gap to be closed there. So welcome, Ross, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, David. And I'm reminded to never go after Ishtar on anything. That was beautifully framed, Ishtar. I think you've done a fantastic job there. And really on that, the first thing I would say is just a massive thank you to ADIA and to David and Caitlin and Ishtar. You were fantastic supporters of us at the DSO. I think it's fair to say the DSO was a sort of, my boss describes it, PK describes it as a runt organisation outside of the tent. I might not put that on LinkedIn, but it genuinely was. We had the luxury of sort of not being in the system, which is fantastic. But the flip side of that is it's quite difficult to get engagement because we genuinely had little direct influence, and you were always very generous with your time. So firstly, thank you very much. I'm mindful whenever I do these sort of overviews, I sort of reset my experience and my own sort of personal experience when it comes to digital skills. So prior to the DSO for the last 15 years, I had the luxury of sort of growing digital businesses in Australia, and was constantly perplexed that we never had onshore talent. My leads were always telling me we have to hire this one individual from this country, and there's no talent onshore. The other thing I noticed was that we were the cliche tech startups. We all looked the same. We all sounded the same. We all came from the same sort of background. And as much as I tried to engineer organizations that were inclusive and diverse, it was very difficult to do it. It was very difficult to get pathways and individuals who even were aware that we existed and that opportunities lay for them. So for me, this is a very sort of personal endeavour. I come at it from an employer perspective, not from a government perspective or a training provider perspective. But I did have the luxury of working with PK and the team at the DSO. And for those not familiar, the DSO had a life of 3 years, and its remit was very much to look into the current cadence and capability of our skilling system and our ability to generate the right people with the right skills to capitalise on the opportunity that will lay over the next 5 to 10 years. I think its origins go back to the Joyce Report. And I think, lo and behold, what we discovered was not through any fault of any individual or organisation, but we're not on a trajectory where we are developing enough talent with relevant skills and talent that's inclusive and diverse. We worked with the TCA, Tech Council of Australia, to sort of size that. And I think it's super important that you do that. And I think the endeavours that we're doing in this space, no one will ever sort of say to us, oh, it's not a cause it's worth backing. But I think if you can position it, whether that be in productivity, or whether that be in community, or whether that be in whatever different lens you want to bring to the need, then it's far easier to get after. You now have a number that you can chase. So in partnership with TCA, we got to 1.2 million people with that describe the digital skills gap by 2030. And that's quite terrifying if you think about it. And we're not going to close that gap just by turning one or two levers. Will only be closed by collaboration across the whole system. So our focus is in VET, but you can't talk about digital capability or the digital skills gap and just stay in a swim lane of one delivery. So we naturally, over the course of the 3 years at the DSO, we looked at the problem through higher ed, universities, etc., non-registered training providers. But I think it's important to call that out because, especially when it comes to digital capability, one size does not fit all when we look at the market and we listen to the stories being told by training providers, but also by industry. What did we learn in 3 years? We learned that there was no language for digital skills. So Ishtar mentioned the sort of interchangeable digital capability, digital fluency, literacy, etc., etc. And unfortunately, we saw that through not just the entry pathways, but right through the professional pathways. There is no consistent language, and therefore, without that consistent language, you can't bring industry and you can't bring the training providers together and have a meaningful conversation. The other thing we noticed without a clear language is you can't talk about pathways. So whether that's going into a high school and trying to explain that there is a digital pathway for everybody in that room, or whether it's looking at transferable talent from industries that are potentially being digitized into alternative digital pathways. So without a language, you can't tell stories. You can't tell stories that can give people something to aim at and something to lean into. And the system itself can't come together. So that was a key sort of principle that we discovered. The number one burning platform, though, was digital capability. Everybody we spoke to, whether it was a large end of industry or a small 1 or 2 person organisation out in rural Australia, was the fact that I'm not confident in what digital capability looks like. And therefore, I can't grow an organisation. I'm not confident I'm hiring the right people. I'm not confident I'm training the right things. So there was definitely a recognition that digital capability was a national burning platform, regardless of industry or location or maturity of employers that we spoke to. Now, it's super important to sort of realise our final, technically we finished about 2 months ago, and the DSO is a final report that we can potentially share in the chat. We saw a massive shift in the last 6 months, and that was generative AI. So we were talking about digital capability for 2 years. In about September, November last year, suddenly the description of digital capability changed. And we were suddenly talking about things like ethics and skills that were potentially not included in the perception of what it meant to be capable on digital platforms and in a digital world. So in such a short period of time, it's completely changed the game, and it's certainly changed the language around it. And we need a system and the capability to reflect those fast-paced changes, and that's where we believe the benchmark can help. I'm going to assume some sort of awareness of what a Jobs and Skills Council is in those that are attending today. We are one of 10. We look after finance, technology, and business. So lovely little niche industries that are easy to get your hand around. We very much recognise that we've been tasked with understanding what do those industries and those employers need when it comes to skilling, not just in digital, but in the core skills of finance and business. But we also recognise that our remit is horizontal, and we need to understand how skilling and how, say, tech skills or digital skills are being played in retail or in agriculture, or far beyond. I mean, they are ubiquitous. So part of our remit is to pick the burning platforms that we think align to finance, technology, and business, but also recognizing if we pick the right ones and we work with organizations like ADIA and the JSA, really what we're talking about is all of economy impact. And I love the framing of work, learning, and life. I think that frames the opportunity perfectly. We have just spent the last 60 days doing our first workforce plan. That's an exercise to engage with finance, technology, and business, predominantly industry to begin with, because we're an industry-led organisation being a JSC, but we've also worked with unions and training providers and state and territory government on that exercise. I think it's fair to say in 60 days, you're not going to develop a workforce plan that is incredibly nuanced. However, we have been really encouraged that once again, digital capability is in the top 9 priorities that have come out of that workforce plan. So what does that mean? That means that we can work confidently with the department and with the government to quantify why digital capability is a priority. We can size what we think the opportunity looks like, and we can then work with organisations like ADIA to propose what might be a solution. How might we start to eat the metaphoric elephant? Because it's going to take an awful long time to really understand and get after digital capability. We are constantly reminded on a daily basis. We are one of 50 organisations that are talking about this. My predecessors were looking at this. And I think that's part of the problem, if we're being completely honest. If you stare at the complexity of the problem, you'll never get anything done. So we've worked with the department to describe a short exercise that looks at taking that hypothesis that Ishtar spoke about. So those 3 principles of access to training, the ability to lift the ADCF as a framework, to then position a digital capability benchmark within that framework, and then importantly work towards acceptance and commitment to scaling what digital capability looks like. So to actually give the benchmark a number. Now I think we're talking about 10 years. So we don't want to get anybody scared that we're going to rush anything through. But I think what we're proposing in the pilot that we're putting together with consultation for next year is we know that there's fantastic organisations such as Queensland TAFE that are looking at digital capability. They provide an opportunity for us to take that benchmark and position it within active pilots across diverse cohorts, different mechanisms to try and deliver training that's focused on digital capability, and almost stress test the language and the description that we use in the benchmark. Because if we feel that our job is not to inform or direct, it's to align behind the articulation of the skills that are reflective of industry, but also other components of the community and the workforce. And if we can keep that consistent and reflecting what industry needs, then it should give the freedom of training providers to train in whatever way they see and they understand that fits. It should give an opportunity for community organisations to use the benchmark in the framework to help to skill. And it should give industry confidence, as they have described the benchmark, that the people that have gone through that experience should be warranted and should be considered as alternative and exciting pathways into work. starting to sound like a politician, which is normally a good moment in time, respectfully, because I'm not, to pause for a second and maybe see David and the panel if there's any questions.
Great, thank you, Ross, and again for everything that you've achieved through the Digital Skills Organisation and now the Future Skills Organisation. Like you said, it would be very easy just to sit there and stare at that complexity for the period of time, and would really encourage everybody to have a read of the final report from the Digital Skills Organisation. And I think kind of as a segue into our next speaker with Emma, that you've talked about kind of that critical connection between industry, community, and training providers is absolutely essential. And it's great to see the work now going on as the Jobs and Skills Council, where, as you've said, it's not just that vertical, but it's the horizontal, seeing digital skills across all of it. So encourage people to please keep putting questions and comments into the chat and the Q&A. And we'll come to those in a minute. But next, delighted to introduce Emma Rice from TAFE Queensland. Emma has worked in the vet sector for the past 25 years, holding a range of positions from teaching, leadership and management across community, enterprise and government services nationally and internationally. And in her current role has been responsible for leading the design, planning, development and implementation of strategies and initiatives to enhance the student experience and educational outcomes for students. So no small task. Thank you so much, Emma, for joining us.
Excellent. Thank you for having me. So I manage the Student Success and Retention Strategy, the First Nations Education Strategy, and chair the Learner Engagement Network for TAFE Queensland. And I also have responsibilities within other strategies at TAFE Queensland around the Digital Futures Ready roadmap. And as such, I'm responsible for the Digital Capability Survey deployed every 2 years to staff. And at TAFE Queensland, we recognise that student success and retention requires intentional action. And I guess that's what Ishtar and Ross are talking about. And that relies on staff embracing opportunities to contribute to each student's learning journey. And I like the words around uplifting and turbocharging. Thank you, Ishtar. We need staff to embrace opportunities to contribute to each student's learning journey, and as such, every staff member is invited to take part in things like the Digital Capability Survey and exceptional opportunities to training that we deliver. I lead a work group that reviews the tool for relevance and currency and then deploy, collate and analyse that data for the state and for the 7 regions. And we've been deployed one in 2017, 2019, 2021 and November 1 of this year. And I'll talk about how the ADCF and the benchmark has affected that. The Digital Capability Survey helps us to know educators and services staff capabilities and make business decisions around identifying PD requirements, resourcing needs, driving quality and consistency of practice, and generally building confidence and competence, which has great financial improvement and brand reliability for TAFE Queensland. I'm also responsible for the applicant self-assessment digital tool and the student self-assessment digital tool. And we analyse that data that informs our institute about what we need to do better for students to be able to learn and enhance their learning experience and support quality improvement in learning and teaching. TAFE Queensland is the largest and most experienced training provider in Queensland, and we deliver practical industry relevant training across a range of industry from entry level up to bachelor level qualifications and at more than 50 locations across Queensland. And Ishtar spoke about regional and remote programs, and also we deliver in various international sites. This looks like over 200 accredited qualifications to more than 120,000 students annually. And like I said, that's from Certificate 2 level up to bachelor level and everything in between, which includes grade 10s at TAFE, adult migrant students, apprentices and trainees, TAFE at schools, and everything else. We have the full gamut of students, including students with diverse abilities and needs, international students, students from various nationalities, and First Nation students. All of this work is supported by our 5,500 staff. That's about 3,000 educators and 2,500 services staff. And just like your organisations, our staff have different abilities, industry, life experience, and backgrounds. So with that, my role requires me to collaborate with relevant business areas and stakeholders across TAFE Queensland to achieve educational priorities and objectives. I work predominantly with staff from all levels of the business and across departments, including various internal and external networks. All of the work that I do contributes to students' attraction, retention, and outcomes. I participate in various national committees, and that's how I've got to speak with you today, including the National Vocational Education Development Network on Digital Benchmarking, and convene a digital capability working group that includes a number of TAFEs from various states. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. Ishtar and Ross have both spoken about a common language on digital ability, and that common language does all those enabling things around ensuring a shared understanding, limiting assumptions, focusing our energies, and better supporting information interpretation. A common language on digital capability supports the discussions we are having internally and externally, and we've all had those different understanding of, or the same name for different things, or different things without the same names. A common language has supported stakeholder meetings such as the one with the FSO, DSO, reducing misunderstandings, providing clarity, and helping us to communicate effectively together as we work towards supporting people in our context to achieve digital capability. Our practice has been informed by the common language and is helping us to identify priority areas. Through the National Digital Capability Survey Work Group, we've spent a number of months in the middle of last year reviewing national and international digital literacy frameworks, trying to identify and agree on one that would all work for us, and we couldn't. So we did a mapping exercise about what we could live with, and you said there was a number of them, Ishtar, but so we had a specific look at the European Framework for Digital Competence of Educators, the NCVR framework, the Digital Literacy Framework 2019, the Global Digital Skill Framework, and the National Digital Literacy Framework Foundation Skills for Your Future program. And then also at that same time, there was some TAFE in New South Wales just deployed the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So we had a lot of different frameworks, and we all wanted to achieve the same thing. And I really love that now we're all pushing with the same language towards the same outcome. So when the ADCF was published in March this year, the working group spent time unpacking it, and we did that internally as well. And the ADCF was quickly endorsed as agreed, accessible and easy to understand guiding framework, and deemed broad enough and easily mapped back to those other frameworks. So we've all agreed that that's what we'll be using, and pushing in the same direction. The framework is integral to the development of TAFE Queensland strategies and helped inform key decisions, as has the benchmark level and examples developed in the FSO, the DSO working group. And that common language and the scenarios and insights provided us examples we could work with, and we will talk a bit more about that later. Thanks, David.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much, Emma. I'm glad I'm not the only one whose head has almost exploded when you look at all of those different frameworks and all of the different options out there.
And everyone's committed to it, every one of them. So we were lucky that ADCF come in March.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, thank you so much. So we'll move into some Q&A, and again, kind of encourage everybody to please use the chat function or the Q&A button in Zoom there. But I might just kick off with a question around that. Maybe firstly to Ishtar and Ross, but we've talked about this whole need for a common language and the Australian Digital Capability Framework. Kind of why that's been chosen as the foundation for this work, when, as Emma said, there's so many different frameworks out there. And probably a little bit in there maybe as well about just the importance of capturing some of the foundation level digital capabilities. So it's fantastic to hear Emma talk about it from a vet perspective in TAFE, but we know there's people very much at a lower level of digital literacy and getting to those basic levels as well. So yeah, would love if you could talk a bit more about why the ADCF was chosen out of everything that could have been chosen.
I think, Ishtar, shall I talk a little bit about the sort of our lens on it, and then I think you're probably best placed to talk about on-ramps, off-ramps, and recognising that it sits within a continuum. I think for our perspective, it was a similar exercise that Emma described. There is no shortage of frameworks out there, and people are passionately committed to, they do have a horse in the race, so to speak. So it's not always a logical discussion, and that's okay. We had maybe three principles. The first was ideally it should be related to other countries, so it should be able to be used in some direct or indirect comparison. It seems silly for us to go out on our own and not have something that you can you can compare with others when you think about the DSO sort of remit around building a nation of digital capability that's globally competitive. So that was one piece. The second piece was sort of due diligence, so to make sure that it definitely is fit for purpose. And then the third was probably more around where is the momentum, and how can we, how can we capture that momentum around something that is recognised and has already gone through a fairly robust consultation process. And that they were the sort of three perspectives that we brought to it. And I would argue the last one was actually probably the first, because without momentum and without it being in the sort of agenda already, you've got a job to do just to get it, on the agenda to then have the discussion. So we kind of went where respectfully there was progress, there was alignment, and great opportunity. So that was the sort of which framework to go for. That they were the sort of principles that were at the DSO and now the FSO.
Thanks, Ross. Yeah, I think it's fair to say that ADCF and the link to that is now in the chat. Caitlin's popped it there, but it is modelled off Digicomp, which is the European Commission approach. So it has that international relatability that Ross spoke about, whilst at the same time having been really robustly tested in the Australian context. Ross mentioned on-ramps. The one thing that I will say about the ADCF, which is following feedback from a number of the ADIA members, it's clear that the ADCF would need to have the pre-levels added in order to really effectively become that common language. That's something that we're in discussions with the government about at the moment and looking at ways that we could achieve that. Dare I say, I don't think it's a huge lift, but it is really imperative. The ADCF currently starts at a level 1, but the reality is that the pre-levels are really important for people just beginning their digital ability. So it's the real first starter stuff of when I pick up a device, how do I set it up? How do I access my email on it? How do I get going, basically? And in an environment where around a quarter of the population are still digitally excluded, we need to make sure that we're providing those on-ramps in that common language so that we're truly inclusive in how we're going to speak about it and address it. We did some consultation with some of our neighbours and our members and got feedback, including from Neighbourhood Houses Victoria, who they did a report on multicultural digital inclusion. And the experience of a lot of the neighbourhood houses there is that people don't have the necessary skills or to set up an email account or set up a device that's been donated to their family. A similar experience was had by Indigimob, who shared with us that a lot of people in their small group training sessions, they may have used a mobile, but they've never used a laptop, and need a lot of support to be able to learn how to do that. And a similar thing, I believe, was found by the Mapping the Digital Gap project. So there's a real need there to make sure that we add the pre-levels to the ADCF, but with that, it covers the full continuum, and will be well positioned to be that common language is our hypothesis.
Fantastic, thanks Ishtar, and maybe coming back to Emma, because I know you're deeply involved in the stakeholder working groups, but kind of really, what does it mean to bring the Australian Digital Capability Framework to life, and kind of what does that look like in practice in terms of the training that you're doing through TAFE Queensland?
Thank you. It means a lot of work. It looks like a lot of activity, David. TAFE Queensland's committed to investing in and preparing our workforce to deliver education and training, and we need to do that for our students. And we need to make sure that we're supporting jobs of the future and the effects of the digital age. In practice, supporting students and staff to attain the skills at the level 3 benchmark that you were just saying, Ishtar, includes programmatic, strategic and measurable activity. We've got people working on the vet training packages, the skill sets and the micro-credentials, and reviewing for technological tasks. And a lot of tech training packages assume knowledge and awareness of the digital skills, and we need to work out what to do about that. The second part of that activity is making sure that our trainers or our teachers have the skills to be able to deliver that training across the different qualification areas. Skill sets and micro-credentials are being developed to respond to rapid pace of technological change. And we've deployed a lot of, we have things on our, publicly available on our website, micro-credentials specifically around digital capability, and continue to offer qualifications in ICT and digital technology. We have deployed a technological applicant and student self-assessment in January this year, and we continue to get data from that to gauge, and it's for us to be able to gauge what people's abilities are, but for the student themselves to be able to gauge their abilities to commence and engage in the learning. And in response, we're providing them with access to resources. So if they're applicants, it's whatever's publicly available. We give them people links so that they can increase their skills. And then if they're internal, if they're students already, then we give them internal links to training to develop their capability and their independent learning needs to ensure they have the skills required to engage in learning and move into the workforce, different positions or higher education if that's what they choose to do. The results of the self-assessment enable us to analyse the skills and expertise of applicants and students, and also what we have to do for teachers. So what we need to be able to, the skills that they need to be able to help the students. And industry want us to provide job-ready students or job-ready staff, and we work closely with industry to ensure that we provide opportunities for students and staff to gain real industry digital skills. Since the ADCF came out in March and the associated benchmarks that we worked with with DSO, it has informed our student success and retention strategy for 23 to 2025. It also has informed our digital learning futures plan, and that was endorsed in May this year with very specific digital objectives for students, staff and industry in each plan. As I said before, we're just about to release the fourth digital capability survey for staff. And this year we have been working collaboratively with the National Digital Capability Survey Work Group and an internal subgroup to make sure the tool aligns to ADCF and that benchmark level. The data received from this survey informs our professional development requirements for the year. It also tells us what's going on in our business. The benchmark and the ADCF inform our level, the level to which we have to be delivering our webinars and our PD activities, and that is aimed at achieving professional learning within the institute that is relevant, current and timely. And also to respond to those scary stats which Ishtar and Ross have spoken about that came out in the DSO's report around growing Australia's digital workforce. 12% increase in demand for digital skills across the economy since 2016. 47% growth is projected for digital expert workforce for 2026, and the 370K digital worker shortfall projected for 2026. So we opened up that report and we closed it down and then we opened it up, and now we're having conversations about that. And also that McKinsey report that came out talking about the next normal and advising that life in the 2030 will be vastly different from what it is today, and that we can expect more change than has ever been in the next 10 years that's ever been experienced in the last 100 years. We need all areas of our business to tool up and take benefit of technology to make sure we are relevant and current. And with that, an understanding of our organisation's current capability to achieve business outcomes now and what we need to do into the future. And the thing about best practice is there's also something better that comes along. So we want to be on the front foot of that. We need to understand, as I said, what our staff capabilities are, and we're going to continue to do that through those survey tools and the professional development feedback. And we're reviewing data from applicants and students to make sure we can deliver services and support resources, including all the resources that we provide and wrap around a student, and making sure we support our different cohorts in the way that is right for them at the right time. And we want to make sure that we intentionally develop smart solutions for people and how they enroll with us, how they access information, how we support them to be tech fluent enough to be able to participate in their learning. And we also want to deliver on or build on the digital resilience. A lot changed during the pandemic, and we have a lot of learning that we from that period, and we want to build on that. And we'll continue to have those internal work groups and those national work groups, and to and what was the word, to all push in the same direction, Ishtar. And we want to be able to contribute to research longer term and to minimise the duplication of effort. And then from that, we're also working with the Learning Resource Group about piloting some of their tools for essential digital capabilities they are developing. And that is it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much, Emma. And there was a question in the chat there just as you were speaking from Ben Teo. Good to see you, Ben. Kind of building on that comment around upskilling staff, which I think is so important, whether that be, you know, educators in the vet sector or whether it be community sector staff, or just acknowledging that context for the staff that are often involved in digital capability uplift. But so Ben's question was, yeah, can you give some examples of how a workplace could use the ADCF for staff training, and especially kind of thinking that the digital tools that are used are often kind of highly contextual to the work that staff might be undertaking. I don't know if you want to take that one, Emma. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yep. So our previous surveys have been very contextual based. Do you know how to use our learning management system? Can you use our Orion system? Can you use this system? Do you know how to use this software? Whereas we're going to be opening it up. We're going to only have 6 questions for longitudinal information from the previous 3 years. And we are going to have the ADCF as the guide, those 21 topics, and asking questions that are more generic and more broad, because we know that we have staff that are coming in from different industry areas, and we know that our staff will go into other industry areas. So we need to know not what we've got for now, but what we potentially can have, because software and the platforms, etc., change all the time. We also spent a lot of time identifying what the gaps were for PD, or the professional development gaps were, and targeting at the level we thought that people were at. And then we've realised, actually, no, we're actually going back to basics, how to use Outlook and how to do different things. And people actually turned up and they liked those sessions. So that tells us that we've still got people in our organisation that can't do all those things at those lower level benchmarks.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Emma. And I might go to Ishtar. There was a really good comment in the chat earlier from Sam, and just acknowledging the kind of the challenge in community organisations and in a community context. And Sam was saying, you know, most of the clients that they're working with can't even necessarily afford a network link, and clearly we acknowledge that as a much broader challenge in digital inclusion around affordability as well. Was also kind of indicating that tiny computer in their pocket, which I liked as a description to, we know as well in the digital inclusion space, many people are mobile only and don't necessarily have the broader environment. So Ishtar, I know it's been a huge focus of ADIA to think about this digital capability framework and how it can be used in the broader community sector beyond vet and beyond employment related programs. So whether you want to pick that up and talk to that as to how it can be used in community organisations.
Yeah, absolutely. And completely acknowledge the fact that digital capability is one part of the puzzle. And we've been doing quite a bit of work with organisations who are looking at device donation, for example, and what some of the systemic blocks are to device donation, how we might be part of helping to shift some of that, because it's affordable access to a connection, affordable access to a device, capability to use that, and then to be able to use that technology in a way that works for the individual. So absolutely, it's a complex issue, and acknowledge we're only talking about one part of that today. And in terms of community organisations' work in the uplift of digital capability, we recognise that so many of our members have really close relationships and a lot of trust from the people that they work with, and that they have an ability to reach certain cohorts in a way that others can't. And that's the strength of a lot of the work that is being done across the organisations. And so what we need to find a way to do is to support that and ensure that it's all aligned to the one common aiming mark. It's really critical that we partner with those organisations who have that deep understanding of the diversity of the cohorts. And I would say too that in our discussions to date about how we set that national benchmark for digital inclusion, there's been a lot of discussion about the appropriate point for that. And the initial hypothesis is to set it at level 3 of the digital capability framework, which is what we think is the point at which someone becomes autonomously digitally capable. So they don't need to sit alongside somebody else to help guide them through how to do certain things. Instead, they're able to be relatively digitally resilient, navigate the inevitable issues that are going to arise, be able to appropriately seek help. And if they choose to then self-propel on that journey of digital capability. What we don't want to see is that the ambition is to only get people to a point where they're then locked in at that level without further support. We want to help people get to the point where they can then choose to take their own learning forward if they want to, and they understand enough and have enough capability to do that.
Fantastic. No, thank you, Ishtar. There's a question there in the chat, maybe for Ross, talking about the ADCF and the sort of benchmarking surveys, but how it might align with the Jobs and Skills Australia Foundation Skills Study. I'm not sure if you can talk to that, Ross.
Yeah, I don't have a pithy answer other than to say that we're aware of and we're in close consultation with JSA. There are also other, each state and territory has its own focus and priority around this. So part of the job at hand to begin with is to sort of steward and make sure that we complement. And as silly as it sounds, sometimes just aligning on language itself can really help outside of the application of a benchmark over a framework, etc. So language is sort of the low-hanging fruit, but incredibly powerful. If we can't align in practice, even if we aligned in language, then that would send a clear message and would help remove some of the duplication. David, I'm going to be selfish. Can I answer the question on vendor as well? There's, I think, a question in there around vendor digital benchmarks and certification. I think what we've seen with the large tech vendors has been brilliant, actually. I think they are completely supportive of the work that we're doing. They genuinely are looking to help in a very agnostic fashion. And I think if you imagine the digital capability where that sits, to Ishtar's point, we're looking to develop skills that are transferable and not pigeonholed into one platform, one vendor. So I think the engagement that we've seen with the likes of Microsoft and AWS and others has been very open and very eager to be part of the consultation and acknowledge that the work that we do at that sort of upper funnel level of digital capability only gives more opportunities for employers and for individuals as they go down their digital career pathway and into more advanced skills.
Yeah, no, fantastic, and fantastic to hear of that level of kind of the industry and vendor engagement. I don't know if Emma, if you wanted to comment on that as well in terms of being able to incorporate some of that sort of broader vendor material and digital benchmarks within the work you're doing in TAFE.
We're just starting to work with a vendor around how we can, they've already created a tool that includes uses ADCF, and we're looking at using that as a digital tool for staff and for students in the longer term. And it will be a self-assessment and then a knowledge assessment. And then with that, they'll have micro-credentials that they can build themselves up from whatever skill they are up into what level they are up, build their skill up. So we've had a really great experience with this vendor and other vendors. So yeah, I think everybody's committed to doing it.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and so important, kind of that practical level skill for then moving into employment. Thank you. So please keep putting any questions and comments there into the chat or the Q&A. I was keen to pick up on what Ross talked about before, and could maybe hear from everyone on this, but just the explosion of generative AI. And how that's changing everything and is kind of changing the game. Would love maybe for you to expand on that a little bit more, Ross, and would love to hear from Emma as well around how TAFE Queensland is thinking about that.
I think I don't think this is a secret. We're doing a small piece of research with Mandala to look at the direct impact of AI into the vet sector. There's fantastic minds that are already thinking about this. I mean, everybody's thinking about this, so I don't think anybody's going to bed not wondering what their strategy is going to be around ChatGPT to begin with, and then obviously AI more general. When we talk to our board, so we've got Microsoft, you've got Atlassian, and we ask a simple question: is this a revolution or is it an evolution? And nearly all of the board go with the former. That this will be as transformative as the internet was, as smartphones were. And even if that isn't the case, wouldn't it be more interesting to plan for a world that may look like that and to be optimistic towards it? So we're trying to canvass as much opinion and insight around strategies to respectfully and sort of ethically consider where does it fit. But I don't think you can have any description of digital capability that doesn't consider the tools that are, to the point earlier, they're on the phone. They're sitting beside social apps. They're so accessible. So there is no sort of learning of coding or sophisticated platform. It's more around usage and what you can, should, and shouldn't do with that sort of technology. So I think we're very keen to be optimistic about it. We don't underestimate its impact, and we're very keen to work with the sector to find out a way to make it tangible and actually bring it into skilling today, because you can't wait. I mean, as I said in my sort of bit up front, back in September, if you look at the search results for ChatGPT and AI, it's almost nothing, and then suddenly it just goes vertical. So we can't afford to debate too long, and we need to bring some strategy and some practice to play.
Thank you. Ishtar, did you want to jump in on that one as well?
Yeah, I'd just add that it's inevitable that the technology is going to keep shifting, and Gen AI is just the perfect example of that, and another reason why we need to all rally around one shared language, because in that way we've got one framework that we're updating that everything else then flows from. The benchmark flows from, the language that we're all using flows from. Otherwise, you can imagine the amount of resource that would go into updating a multitude of frameworks instead of actually that resource going into the training delivery that needs to happen to support people to adjust to that. It's also another reason why we think it's important to set the benchmark at the level at which people are autonomous. That inevitable continual shifting of technology means that continual learning is just part of life. And so you need to set people up with the capability to be able to respond to that and do that.
Thanks, Ishtar. And Emma, I don't know if you want to comment on that as well. I can only imagine what it's been like in your world to kind of suddenly think about generative AI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So initially we spent a lot of time just doing the environmental scan about what other institutes were doing and how they were responding. We've spent time reviewing and even developing policies and procedures and strategy documents around that, and including all of our assessment processes and plagiarism and the Turnitin tools that we use, etc. We've spent delivered a number of professional development sessions to staff to upskill them around their knowledge of it, because students are using it. They're using it in their everyday life. They got access to it, just like Ross said. And also upskilling students about what the expectation of use is at TAFE Queensland, and how we can engage with this tool ethically and respect that the students are already using it out in their communities. And with that, one of the things that we've done is engage student ambassadors in a conversation about what's your understanding of this? How are we going to use it here? How can we support you to have a better understanding of it and do that safely? And delivering training for staff, like I said, and yeah, just basically looking at it from, it is a tool and and it's going to keep changing and it's here to stay. And I think putting the human aspect back into that tool and making sure that, again, like we're on the front foot of that.
Someone far smarter than me described it in two ways. They said it's maths, not magic. and we're on a trajectory from fear to FOMO, which I think is a nice way to think about where we are.
Absolutely, and a good kind of tie into, yeah, Bentio made a comment in the chat there as well, saying yes, it's transformative for the people who may have access to it, but also risks kind of accelerating that widening of the gap. So certainly that FOMO element in there, and yeah, acknowledging those challenges. Maybe staying with Emma, there was a couple of questions for you, Emma, in the chat there. One was when the results of the 2023 survey might be out. And the other question was, are you able to share your digital capability framework for staff, whether that's available more broadly, just kind of, or if not, just kind of keen to understand what sort of questions you're asking and how you measure that across staff.
Okay, happy for people to reach out to me and I can go through that individually. It's not something that we're going to just provide publicly at this stage. We're always happy to help out and have those conversations. For the survey results, they'll come out at the end of December, and that will go out as a statewide resource, a statewide report to all the executive staff at TAFE Queensland, and then individually through the campuses, 7 individual regions. It's not something that we publicly release at this stage, but I did say before that we're really keen to contribute to research, and we had a conversation in our National Digital Capability Survey Working Group about becoming and doing that ethical practice requirements and being able to do that research more broadly and deliver that or deploy that. So yeah, happy to have those individual conversations if you wanted to reach out and we can have a chat through that. But we did look at the DigiComp survey that they've got, the self-assessment tool. We've had, we've been working with the Learning Resource Group about the survey that they'll be deploying. We have used literally the ADCF and the topics and changing them into questions about how do you maintain privacy at TAFE Queensland using these different formats or these different platforms. Yeah, so happy to have a chat.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Emma. It's a good question, really good question there from Courtney as well, kind of thinking about the materials and other supports that organisations might need to enable kind of use of the framework and uptake. So thinking about things like digital leader change programs and kind of growth mindsets and thinking about those sorts of elements. I don't know who might want to tackle that, but kind of, yeah, how do we provide some of those supporting materials and programs?
I think well, from our perspective, we can guess from the work that we did at the DSO what that sort of companion support looks like for something like this. But it would be I think the pilot that we're seeking to do will actually trial different methods of support around the adoption. And I think we'll learn more from that or we'll build on the assumptions and the learnings that we got from the pilots that we ran in the DSO. One thing I will say is quite interesting. So I read that comment and my head went somewhere else, and that was we have heard lots of industry and lots of employers talk about the digital capability of line managers, and it's not so much the way they articulate that is a line manager may be very well versed in a specific part of digital, but potentially has no experience with, say, cyber. So has no foundational skills when it comes to the area of cyber, yet will be responsible for a team that has cyber specialists or will be looking at procurement in a certain area of digital skills. So the idea of digital capability for leaders or for managers is something that's come through in our consultations a lot. And when you unpack it, it's not that dissimilar from what we're talking about. Obviously, in some areas, it's a different level, but the actual design and the matrix of it is very similar.
Yeah, thank you. And Ishtar, I don't know if you want to comment on that from a community perspective and kind of how we might think about that and enabling community organisations to make the best use of this.
Yeah, there's quite a few kind of adjacent challenges that form part of the mix here. So agree in terms of change management and growth mindset. We've also heard that literacy can be one of the challenges that crops up as you're seeking to support people with digital literacy. So this is not, what we're proposing here doesn't solve every part of the challenge, but we do think it can go a long way, but it will still need to be in partnership with other measures.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Ishtar. There's a good question here from Brad Howarth in the questions panel. Talking, I think, as much around kind of motivation. So, what can be done to encourage people to take up training, maybe at the advanced level, but also just at the very basic levels, and what more can be done from a motivational perspective to encourage people to take up training. Do you want to go, Ishtar?
Go first. Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's another reason why it's really important to lean into the really diverse range of organisations that do work in this space. Not everyone's going to think, oh yeah, I'm a great candidate to do this course at a TAFE or at an RTO. And often, particularly those who are earlier on their digital capability journey, there'll be some other pathway in, whether that's going to a community group or a local library. And David, you yourself at Infoxchange, you've had really interesting experience of of engaging people through, for example, talking about bushfire preparedness, and that then becoming the opening of a conversation of how digital and online capability is relevant to that. So the organisations on the ground in the communities will understand what can motivate the particular individuals that they're working with. And that's something we need to embrace.
Absolutely. Do you want to pick up on that one, Ross, as well?
Just on that last bit, I think the failure is to assume that we will tell people how to adopt this. I think it's more around we're deliberately designing it to be almost a lift and shift, and you can bring it to life and translate it in whatever way fits with your organisation and your cohort. The only thing we would add to that is that we need to then centralise the feedback. So we start to learn and codify what works with certain people, certain methods, certain moments in time. So we don't just sort of run off and do our own thing and don't collectively get smarter and improve the system as we go.
Fantastic. And there's a follow-up piece there as well on kind of, we're talking about the demand for skills from industry, but also kind of better understanding demand for skills training coming from workers or citizens more broadly. I don't know if that's coming up in your sort of workforce planning, Ross, and kind of how you take that community dimension into planning. And maybe after you, Ross, we could hear from Emma on that as well.
Yeah, Emma, I think will add great colour to this, but we did a few small pilots at the DSO. One was looking at high schools in the Liverpool area of Sydney, and we must have spoke to nigh on almost 300. I think they were year 10 and year 11s, and no one in the room had any inclination that they had a digital pathway or digital skills were important to them as they left school. So back to my earlier point, a language and narrative, and then stories that can be relatable is 100% the first piece, I think, to this problem, because it's just not on the radar. It's we need to do a lot of work around the campaign and the stories that are being told around digital pathways and the benefit to individuals for mobility and for inclusion and financial and future sort of careers.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ross. Do you want to pick up on that one as well, Emma, and just kind of what's the demand that you're seeing from either existing workers or citizens more broadly in terms of the considerations that go into developing your courses?
Yeah, so I love the idea of the common language and the common story, and I think that's really important. So we've had to look across our student and staff cohort, and something that we've been doing a lot in the last 2 years, and specifically in the last 12 months. And at the minimum requirements for engaging with us and interacting with our business, how they choose our qualifications, how they engage online, how they can study online and submitting assessments online and doing all that stuff, and how they engage with their teachers and their peers. And digital capability affects everyone, everywhere, all of the time. The general public, we've spoken about accessing banking online and making Medicare claims and my.gov, etc. And even down to my aging parents and how they use social media and responding to those phishing emails and scammers. And then even just watching them use those QR codes on the at the restaurants. So, and then to what my daughter does using music concerts, booking music concerts online. So it affects everybody, everywhere, all of the time. And we've really had to have a look at how people are accessing, how we can support them to better access. And those levels really support us to solve some of those problems, because now we agree on something and we're moving towards that as the aspirational minimum. Don't know that I answered your question. Sorry.
Oh, it's good. I think we can all relate to that. I can certainly relate to getting those calls from my parents on a frequent basis on phishing emails saying, "Hey, should I be clicking on this one or
Yes.
not? Is this one legit?" But I think it's a really
Or what do I
important.
do now? I've clicked on it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really important consideration, and I think that's why we were so pleased from an Australian Digital Inclusion Alliance perspective to work with FSO and TAFEs and more broadly on this project, because it is bringing together, yes, a better recognition of what industry is looking for, but also kind of doing that co-design with community to better understand what the motivation is, and what is the best way to engage from a community perspective. So we might move towards wrapping up shortly, but I might just ask each of our panelists to kind of do a bit of a wrap up on. So we've heard about the digital capability framework. We know there's been a lot of work done, but we're still fairly early in this process. So kind of what people should do next. What are the next steps that we're looking at for the framework, and how can organisations on the webinar continue to engage in this? I might go Ishtar and then to Ross and then to Emma.
Thanks, David. Sure. I'll let Ross speak to the pilot process that's going to follow from here, but there is a process of testing the hypothesis that we're entering into. But even more broadly than that, it would be great if organisations would consider the applicability of the ADCF as a common language to their organisation, and the possibility and the idea of level 3 as the national benchmark. We'd love feedback from organisations, and if you're keen to stay across what we're doing, we can share details for how to do that in a follow-up note. And yeah, as much as we can to build momentum towards as many organisations as possible engaging in this approach.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ishtar. Ross?
I think it's important to call out that, this problem is far bigger than the FSO. We are taking it on because it's what the industry have told us, and we will naturally sort of first gravitate towards VET and the system that we're tasked to champion. But it doesn't have to work like that. It doesn't have to be linear. If you look at the amazing work that Emma spoke about, they're using the benchmark already, and I think that's what we hope to see. We'll have a formal pilot that'll play out over the next many months, years. But what we'd love actually is for industry to race ahead of us, or for organisations to race ahead of us, and then using it and being part of the community to come back and share insights. And that would be fantastic. I think that's where we're going to get scale. I think if we rely on one organisation, whether it's us or another organisation, to sort of champion it and run it, it's going to take too long, and there's missed opportunities for everybody involved. So I think our job is to use the pilot to help get enough material confidence and to de-risk the idea so that people can then pick it up and run with it themselves.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ross. And Emma, from your perspective, kind of next steps and where to from here?
It's pretty much what Ishtar and Ross said. So becoming aware of the ADCF and the levels and how it impacts your business and the people that you are working with, whatever your context. Collaborate with others and ask lots and lots of questions and get involved. And I'm sure when I started with the DSO stuff, I was like, what are we talking about? And so I was asking the dumb questions, if you like, and sharing that information, sharing that skills, and sharing that knowledge. And I'm really happy. That's why I'm really happy for people to contact us. We haven't got it right, but we're really happy to start. And we don't have to be perfect. We just have to get going. So.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Emma. And there's a good comment from Jennifer there in the chat as well, saying assuming this work also includes connection with national projects like Be Connected and INWIS libraries. And certainly we can say Good Things Foundation has certainly been involved in the consultation process for the digital capability framework and has been helping support the development of that. And in fact, one of the really strongest advocates of including the foundation levels of digital literacy within the framework. And certainly from a library's perspective as well, would absolutely encourage engagement as we continue the consultation on that. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. A huge thank you to Ishtar and Ross and Emma for being so generous with your time on today's meetup. I think the comment you made earlier, Ishtar, on momentum, it's been fantastic to see. It was only 3 or 4 years ago when people were telling us there's no way you'll get a common framework. There's no way you could even try and get some common engagement and common language. So I think it's been fantastic just to see the level of engagement, to say kind of across industry, across community organisations, across educators, across government, to see all of that come together. So a huge well done to everybody on the call for getting us to this point, and still lots of work ahead. So we'll share the recording from today. We'll also share some notes and some of the links that have been provided in the chat. If you haven't already, please make sure you sign up to our ADIA newsletter. But other than that, from me, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Please stay in touch, and we look forward to seeing you at the next meetup. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.